Hello, this is Keisha Rogers, and I am coming to you today with a report with my colleague Brian Lance. As many of you know, we started last week with the LaRouche report addressing what's happening with the breakdown of our physical economy as a result of the insane policies being orchestrated by the Biden collective, Avatar Joe Biden in the White House, who is more determined to get the United States into a confrontation with Russia over Ukraine. And he is telling you, just as Janet Yellen just recently said, that the price that needs to be paid in order to put pressure on Putin in Russia is that you, the American citizen, has to pay at the pump, that you have to pay these exorbitant prices for oil and gas, for energy prices. And we're seeing this as a result of the determination of the globalist agenda of what is coming from the Federal Reserve and Mark Carney, the Bank of England, and the whole operation that is determined to destroy the United States. The target, as we've said, is not Russia, not Putin. It is you, the American people, and the United States. And I found it that what President Trump had to say in his last speech, going after the insane energy policies, the insane climate agenda, which we can probably get to a little bit later on, is directly impacting the American people and is out to destroy the American people. Now, what we're going to take up today is, as I said in previous discussion that I held with my colleague Pat Ruckert, we took up what's happening with the crisis in the drought and the water crisis. Today, I'm with Brian Lance, and we're going to look at energy. We're going to look at what's happening with the oil and gas industry, but energy overall. But he's going to take us through a case study, particularly of what's happening in Texas and the result of the fight back that's being waged in Texas as a result of companies like BlackRock, owned by Fink, and what this has resulted in terms of the idea that BlackRock has been determined to go after companies that won't go with the woke agenda, won't go with the climate agenda, and there's a major fight back against this. But I want Brian to give us a sense, first of all, what does it mean when you have people like Joe Biden saying, well, you have to suffer the consequences. If that means you don't eat, if that means you pay exorbitant prices in gas, then you have to deal with that. What's really going on with the energy crisis right now, and how should we be thinking about this in terms of needing to put a stop to this and implementing what LaRouche has called for around bankrupting the Federal Reserve, bankrupting the central bankers, and going with a real national banking policy so we can address this crisis. So why don't you start off by giving us a sense of what's actually happening with this energy crisis?
Well, we're here in Texas. Of course, Texas is the largest oil producing state. It's also the largest natural gas producing state. In oil, it's 4 times larger than, say, North Dakota or New Mexico. In natural gas, Pennsylvania is a big producer, but Texas produces roughly half again as much as Pennsylvania. Those figures being what they are, reflects the Permian Basin. The Permian Basin in West Texas, and it extends over into New Mexico, is the largest producing area. That's where any increased expansion of production, by and large, is going to come for the whole country, is the Permian Basin. The producers there are saying, look, we can't get the sand, we can't get the crews, water disposal is a problem. We can't go much faster. And that came out in the hearings. Pioneer Resources, which is a large independent producer in the Permian Basin, Their CEO testified to that yesterday before the House Energy and Commerce Committee, saying that's that. Now, the fallout is just to take an example, the cost of ammonia, which is produced with nitrogen from the air, but with natural gas. Ammonia fertilizer, it's going to cost a farmer growing grains, food grains here in Texas, $128,000 more this year than last, on average. A rice farmer is going to pay $82 an acre more. So that's all going to get passed on to consumers. Farmers aren't making a lot of money anyway. I mean, most of what gets made, is managed through the commodities markets and by the big grain cartels. So farmers are not, fat and happy in this situation to begin with. And now they're getting clobbered. They had over 200% increases in fertilizer costs last year. So food costs, as you mentioned, Keisha, food costs is one way of bringing it directly home. And then you take Biden. I mean, this is nuts. I mean, what the hell did they think they were going to do? They cut off oil and gas and metals and stuff from Russia. Russia is the largest oil exporting nation in the world. And oil and gas prices are not set, here in Texas. They're set in the spot markets, the future markets. That's New York, that's London, that's Dubai. These are global markets. So you take Russia out of the picture, because the spillover was massive. I mean, other bankers and insurance companies and shipping companies wouldn't touch Russian oil, even if they weren't shipping to the United States. They were going to get hit with the same sanctions. So this is just crazy.
How many barrels of oil are used? How many barrels of oil are actually used daily in the United States, and how many are produced in the United States? As opposed to, you said the largest exporter of oil and gas is Russia. So how much is actually produced here?
Well, yeah, we are producing about 12 million barrels a day. 12, and we were at the highest at 13 million. And now again, we're a net energy importing country. For a short time in 2020, we were a net exporter. Certainly we have the potential capacity to do that. But with the Biden policies, this isn't going to function. And there's deeper problems too. But we are a net importer. Speaking of oil specifically, Keisha, we're importing more, roughly 45% of our oil is imported. Most people think somehow that's not the case, or aren't familiar with that figure, but that's the case. We're dependent on oil imports in a big way, crude oil imports. And we import petroleum products and so forth as well. So we're not somehow at this point, energy independent. This is, so the prices have skyrocketed. We're hit by those prices, of course. And the Biden collective now is politically desperate. I said, well, we're going to pump 1 million barrels of oil a day out of the strategic oil reserve. Well, we consume 20 million barrels of oil a day in the United States. So adding 1 million isn't, it may move the dial 10 cents a gallon in terms of gas, but maybe 20 cents, but that's about it. And that oil taken out has got to be put back in. So this doesn't function.
And when it's $7 a gallon, that's no.
No, and the world consumes 100 million barrels. Again, the oil price is not set in the United States; it's set globally. The way since we did away with in the 1970s long-term state-to-state energy contracts that got us. That was when oil was 25, gasoline was 25 cents, 30 cents, 40 cents a gallon. We had long-term contracts with countries like Saudi Arabia. That all blew up in the 70s, and those petrodollars, that started flowing, went right into New York and London banks. So the world now is consuming 100 million barrels of oil a day. So you add 1 million barrels, 2 million, it doesn't work. It's ridiculous. And then Biden says, oh, we're going to get these big major oil companies to produce more oil. They're leasing federal lands, but they're not developing. Well, first of all, 90% of all oil in the United States is developed on privately owned land, not federal land. So maybe more should be developed on federal land, but the point is that that's a small part of the whole picture. And secondly, over 80% of the oil produced in the United States comes from independent oil producers. This is, we got a guy over there in the Permian Basin, Audrey Steffens. Or maybe he pronounces it Stevens, but with Endeavor Energy. He and over in Tyler, Texas, across the state, a guy named Curtis Newborn Energy. Between the two of them, they're drilling more rigs. They have more drilling rigs out there, drilling for oil right now, than Chevron and Exxon combined. Just two outfits.
Wow.
All of this noise is, doesn't allow people to think through what's required to organize an economy. The exception that Mr. Stevens and Newborn exemplify, that's what we got to promote. We promote, with national banking, with national credits that flow into promoting production, promoting these guys that will get out and produce. While the big majors are all tied up, hogtied by ESG and their investor concerns that the money's got to flow to Wall Street, to us, as opposed to drilling more oil. So the big major oil companies are stuck and trapped in the Wall Street game, of stock buybacks and dividend payoffs. So that's another feature of it.
In a report you are going to be putting out that goes through a lot of this more in detail. And you mentioned that the independent oil rigs, that the oil rig production has increased to 60%, but this is largely as a result of these independent drillers that you have just mentioned. So what happens, what is the impact of the Biden policy on these independent drillers?
Well, they're a rough and tumble bunch. The two gentlemen I mentioned, they're both in their 80s, and they're still at it. And they're independent. They've developed their own financing, so forth over the decades, and they've been through near-death experiences many times in this crazy business. So you have to change the situation, you've got to put a floor under the whole energy pricing system. You've got to break this speculative, up and down volatility. We've talked about it several times. The volatility, where prices rise and fall based on events in the futures market, the spot market. These are abstractions. The point is, you got people working both sides of the street right now. They make money shorting different metals and resources, promoting a collapse. Then you got others driving prices up. But that absolutely undermines production. And the oil industry, combined with the chemical industry, it is manufacturing. It's a major chunk of the U.S. manufacturing industry. We can be proud of it. I mean, we export more refined products, petroleum and related products to the world than we import. We are a natural gas exporter, but that comes with the investment, large scale capital investment. Just think about it. It was just 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago, actually roughly about 2 years ago now. It was in April 20th or 19th or 20th, that the price of oil dropped to negative $38 a barrel. Negative. If you would take oil off of the producer's hands, they would pay you to take it. The reason was there was no storage capacity left. There was nowhere to put it. And that was because of the collapse during COVID. So, what we're dealing with today, Keisha, is we're dealing with also the aftermath of that. I mean, who's going to put money back into an industry that just about, completely failed 2 years ago? And so we got to get off this roller coaster.
Well, that makes an interesting point, because that begs the question of, there's always this discussion of energy independence. We can become energy independent. Well, what does that actually mean? What does energy independent look like? What would it mean for the United States, in this context, to become truly energy independent?
Well, in a certain sense, I mean, this is my own view, but in a certain sense, energy independence doesn't function in a certain way. You have heavy crude oil, you have light, sweet crude oil. You got to match the production with the refineries, and then with the markets. And so it's not, it's like Texas here, our refineries are largely dealing with heavy crude. Well, but shale produces light oil. So a lot of that can't be processed here. So that's among these complicating factors that come in just in regards to oil. But overall, yes, energy independence absolutely is what we should aim for. But complementing that, then we can work out long-term contracts again, state-to-state contracts, where we pay $25, maybe now it's $50, whatever, but state-to-state agreements. It was $25 a barrel for oil coming out of Saudi Arabia, even half that amount at one point. These are long-term 10-year, 20-year contracts. Why leave it to the market? The magic of the marketplace and these speculators. Countries can get together and work these things out. But otherwise, energy independence means nuclear power. We need several hundred gigawatts of nuclear power, 300 million gigawatts, or 200, 300 gigawatts, 1,000 megawatts of nuclear power. If we're going to become a manufacturing superpower, let's not just look at energy in itself. Look at how do we become a full set economy again that can produce for ourselves, and then do some trading where it's effective, it's useful. Export markets can be a driver to capital turnover and innovation and so forth. So we certainly want to do some trading, but we want to be, as I'm sure you agree, Keisha, we want to be a solid producer ourselves and have overall security, energy security, but food security, and so on and so forth. So I think that's what we've got to aim for. Nuclear critical to that. And in the meantime, obviously we've got coal, and coal is very clean. What you see coming out of a coal plant out of the stacks is water vapor. They introduced air scrubbers back in the 1970s. The big fixation now, this gets into this question of the IPCC and so on and so forth, right? Is this crazy?
They just put out a crazy report, but go ahead.
Yeah. That 2025, we got to stop all growth in carbon, effluents and whatever. By 2025, we got to put a lid on it in 2025. Not so. For a couple of different reasons. First of all, carbon. I mean, carbon is, of course, what plants eat. We're not talking about carbon monoxide. I'm talking here about these guys saying carbon dioxide is this horrible thing, and it's completely off. You know, just it's brainwashing.
Right.
So the coal plants are now attacked because of carbon pollution. Well, the carbon pollution they're talking about is carbon dioxide. You emit carbon dioxide. That doesn't mean you are a polluter. You know, it's if you're a productive person, you're contributing to mankind and to the universe. So that's a different. That's the way in which we should approach it overall. We should be optimistic, and we can solve these problems. Yeah. So and natural gas and as well can be utilized very effectively for power, as it is here in Texas, and it can be improved on. And so that's part of the mix as well.
One last question. I want to go back to Texas and the fight that's been waged here. We mentioned that briefly at the beginning. You've been discussing it. I think the bill that was passed was SB 13.
Yeah, Senate Bill 13. Yep.
Senate Bill 13. Can you say just a little bit more about the impact of that?
Yeah, that's playing out right now. Just March 16th, our state comptroller, Glenn Hager, authored a letter, sent a letter out to 19 financial institutions. This has been a step-by-step process, but they're implementing Senate Bill 13, passed by the legislature, signed by the governor here, which says, if you're boycotting oil and gas, the oil and gas industries, we're not going to allow you to engage in financial activities, invest, for example, the monies of our pension funds. We're cutting you off. Why should we give you our money to manage when you turn around and cut off our oil and gas industry and leave us high and dry?
And they're talking to people specifically, like Larry Fink of BlackRock.
Yeah.
People, right?
Yeah, he's busy talking out of both sides of his mouth now, trying to say he's a friend of oil and gas, and at the same time, he's a friend of the rabid greenies. So, you can't have it both ways. And so that's what the state of Texas, but other states as well around the country, really the red states, many of the red states are waging a fight now against BlackRock, like you mentioned, and Vanguard, and against the ESG generally. That's environment. Environment, social governance. It's the whole idea that companies should not be concerned with their industry and developing their industry and reinvesting in their industry, and of course generating profits to do that and paying off investors in the process, but instead have to integrate all of these environmental governance decisions into what they do or don't. It's worth mentioning the Securities and Exchange Commission has been floating a proposal. It has a long title. It's called the Enhancement and Standardization of Climate-Rated Disclosure for Investors. Investors want to know, how much pollutants is your entire supply chain generating? Well, the example is given among others, if you're making some kind of like Cocoa Puffs up in, in Minnesota. You got cocoa farms in Africa. You break down the whole supply chain that goes into making the cereal that ends up on your table or your kid's table or whatever. And, and you're supposed to be accountable for the amount of, first of all, carbon dioxide that's being produced all along this process, you know. And so all of the, industry, refineries, but also all sorts of industry, farmers, everybody's supposed to fall in line and produce what? Data, 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 data. It's all data. And of course, then what does it come with? It comes with computer models, just like the, IPCC on climate, these computer models, which if you tweak them, you can get one answer. And if you tweak them another way, you can get another answer, right? But you're going to base decision-making on the physical economy of the United States based on this kind of cow manure, can we say? I mean, this is nuts.
Yeah.
So the good thing is, Biden's absolutely desperate, right? This pumping 1 million barrels of oil out of this is another feature of this. I got to bring it up briefly. Our refineries are already operating at 92% of capacity right now across the country. A big chunk, I think it's about 40% is, maybe it's not quite that much, but a huge chunk of it's down here in Texas, but in the greater Houston area, and then extending over into Louisiana and whatnot. But it's operating at 92%. Okay, who's going to process the crude that's going to be pumped now out of the strategic oil reserve? We're maxed out in refineries. For 35 years, from the 1970s to 2014, not a single refinery is built in the United States outside of Alaska. And it wasn't that much in Alaska. And only 5 have been added since. We haven't invested in building the refining capacity that we need going forward. And again, this is another feature of the actual physical economic situation that we're in. We're going to have to, we need national credit. We need a national bank. We got to, break the Wall Street addiction to grow our way out of this cul-de-sac the greenies and the Biden types and rhinos and whatnot are putting us in.
All right, absolutely. Yes, so as we said, we're going to have these discussions. Thank you, Brian, to discuss what the problems are, areas of production that have collapsed as a result of the insane policies that have been going on, but also how we actually invest, as said, the needed credit for the national banking policy into these areas of production, because we need to start producing again. So thanks, Brian. Looking forward to
the 2022 elections are just incredibly important. We can really begin turning this around.
Yeah. So that's what we have for today. I want people to continue to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're going to be discussing more areas of production that we need our national banking policy to really start to drive investment into, and to break the back of Wall Street and the Federal Reserve central banking policy. That's what this is about, to give you more of an understanding of why we're so eagerly pushing the role of a national banking credit policy. And so be sure to go to larouchepac.com to learn more about our platform there, and we will be talking with you soon. Thanks a lot.